Hi, everyone. This is going to be a continuation of our prior two episodes. This is episode 3 on the book of Daniel, and we're trying to prove the messianic prophecies came true in Jesus in all ways, in every particular. And the last episode, we proved that by that time, we proved that Jesus had arrived on time as prophesied, and he was cut off exactly on time at 32 AD. And we provided you all that evidence. And go back to episodes 2 and 1 to see that, and I'll provide a link to those in the description. Today, just as important is you have to prove everything, just not what you like. You have to prove everything. Final proofs are Daniel prophesied of the temple's destruction in Daniel 9:26, and he prophesied of a destroyer's covenant in Daniel 9:27. So you'll see how that happened. But first, we need a little bit of history. So let's look at the overview. All right. So the prophecies we're looking at all involve the temple. So let's get a little bit of overview of the temple in historical sense. And we need to know in what relation was the prophecy of Daniel first written in relation to these dates. Now, some of us may not know, but when you go to BC dates, the older dates or the higher numbers, 605 would be older than, let's say, 444 BC. So it's counting downward towards zero. From 605 downward is later in time. Some people don't know that, and I sometimes look at it and get confused because we're used to all dates moving upward from basically 2001 all the way to 2023 and so on. So we see the numbers going up. These go down, just to remind you. Okay, so the subtitle there is Seizure and Babylon Captivity is in two ways, and so that's just a fact, and it might be of importance as we go. 605 BC, Babylon seizes the young men in Israel, including Daniel, and takes them to Babylon, but not everybody. 598 BC, Babylon's first mass forced deportation of Israelites in very large numbers. So now they're being more serious. They like these people. They're hardworking. They're helping them in administering their country, and they are want them alive. They're not kidnapping them to do anything but help them. And Babylon was a major empire, so this is like stealing scientists from another country. Let's say that kind of thing. 587 BC, Babylon returns to Israel for more mass deportation. So now they're very serious. They want to empty the country out clean, virtually. Leave just the ravens and just nothing really of much. So that leads to 586. How are they going to stop the Jews from wanting to go back to Israel? Well, the easiest thing is destroy Jerusalem and its temple. So that was the first temple, and it's destroyed. And that's kind of important because Daniel's going to be giving a prophecy of a temple being destroyed. But how do we know that's not the one he's talking about? Because he prophesies after the first Babylon attack on Jerusalem in 586, during the time period of the end of the 6th century. So he is very much not possibly prophesying of that temple destruction. And the Jewish people don't think so either. Anyway, so 538 BC is the estimated date of death of Daniel. And a very material date to keep in mind in this event, because it's part of the prophetic triggers, 444 BC, absolutely documented in Jewish history, the exact time and date. Nehemiah, the leader of the city of Jerusalem, decides to rebuild Jerusalem and its temple. So the people have gone back, and now they're going to rebuild. And so this is when the date of the order that went out, and we've seen how important that trigger was in the episodes previously. Okay, so let's move on. I think we also need to understand that in BibleStudies.org, they've assembled here all the references that Daniel himself states he's a personal witness. So a lot of skeptical scholars try to make it out. There's many different writers who are writing this, but the evidence is that Daniel is speaking in the first person, and he says that he refers to himself as a witness in 7:2, 8:1, 15, 8 verse 1, verse 15, verse 27, chapter 9, verse 22, chapter 10, verse 2 and 7, and chapter 12, verse 5. So that kind of puts that to kibosh. And then he claims that he was present in the royal court in Babylon from shortly after his exile from Judea in 605 BC to around 535 BC. So that we deduce from Daniel 1, verse 21 and Daniel 10, verse 1. This is Robert Bradshaw's article, The Book of Daniel, in BibleStudies.org from the UK, July 2022. That is approximately a 70-year period. Okay, and as we mentioned in the prior two episodes, God, the way this is set up is God sends Gabriel, an angel, to explain the Messiah would come and be cut off, and God would provide atonement through this Messiah. It actually uses these words. One, and so I'm going to give you a synopsis of what we've seen in the prior episodes. God commanded Gabriel to tell Daniel he was, quote, highly esteemed, and that God would send a Messiah by the 69th times 7, and it could be any period of time. It could be months, days, or years. If it's years, it fits Jesus perfectly. So he would send a Messiah by the time of that time period, but he would be cut off sometime after 62 by 7, and that's exactly true too, and it was 42 32 AD. That's in Daniel 9:25 to 26. So Messiah is mentioned in both of those verses twice. 2, God will make, quote, God will make atonement for iniquity by 70 times 7 years. So that's something that a lot of other people have never tied to what Jesus says. But when Jesus says 70 times 7, he means it's any number necessary, and it's an unlimited possibility, and it's not defined. So that date is not necessarily has to be specifically assigned. But regardless, we have the date that Jesus is cut off, and so that's the same as making atonement, so it fits 70 times 7 as well. Okay? Okay, now we're going to get into the two things about God sends Gabriel to give prophecy on the temple's destruction. And this is something that it has to be fulfilled as well. And a lot of explanations have been provided, and I think these will be more satisfactory for those who study this carefully. But give me your comments if you disagree and you think it's something else. Anyway, the prophecy is the destruction of the city and sanctuary at a time after 62 times 7 years. So the temple has been wiped out, is destroyed, as they're talking about and prophesying. So sometime in the future, after the 60 times 7, the city of Jerusalem, therefore, and its sanctuary will be destroyed at the same time. Now, when did that happen? That happened for a fact together in 70 AD. And the reason I bring that up is there are claims that there's a different temple destruction where it was not destroyed completely, but was invaded or violated, and that's in a different time period. And the only reason they connect that is there was basically a pagan idol or pagan pig or whatever sacrificed inside the temple, and they think that's the abomination of desolation. But it requires that the city, to fulfill this prophecy, it must be the city and the temple are destroyed, and that does not occur till a much later subsequent time, and that's only in 70 AD. So all those scholars who try to matter of factly say it's this other period of time, I think it's 134 BC. Epiphanes is the person who did this sacrilege in the temple, and so they're looking all in the wrong direction because they're not paying attention to the word city. Okay, and we'll see that as we go. 4, destroyer, leader of an army. A leader of an army will make covenant with many for 1/7 period. And it could be, remember I said days, months, or years. I'm going to say it's months. And again, I don't think people have paid attention to who the leader of that army was, because it's often mistranslated to make it look like it was Jesus was the prince of this army that comes and destroys the law and the prophets. I mean, that's how they want to construe it. And you have to understand that's not what's really going on. It's the Roman officer who was in charge of the destruction of the temple made a covenant in a 7 of something period, and it was months. We'll show you, I believe that's the right answer. Who in the middle will, quote, put an end to sacrifice and offering, end of quote, and set up an abomination that causes desolation. So the way a lot of Christians try to skew this verse is they think Jesus did the end of sacrifices, so they're going to try to ignore the fact that this person also is set up an abomination. So it has to be the evil. This is an evil person, not a good person. This is not Jesus. So this is how the Paulinist side tried to distort this passage and then lose of an important prophecy of Jesus Christ and lack credibility because it's not true. So in the middle, we'll see, in the middle of the 7 months of the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD, in that last 7 months, they made a deal. We'll see what the deal was. But they put an end to sacrifice offering, and you'll see there's actual information that during the period while the people were in Jerusalem, they were still doing sacrifices, but they ran out of lambs at a certain point, That's when the Roman authorities wouldn't let any lambs in. So this is the way they effectively put an end to sacrifice at that time. And then when they finally tore down the walls, they then, in an uncircumcised state, flooded into not just the temple, but in the most sacred place where the high priest is. And they actually saw the high priest's garment, so we know they had breached the most holy of holies with that in the temple. So that's what we're going to show you today. Hope you'll find it interesting and proof positive that Jesus fulfilled all these prophecies, and God also fulfilled all the prophecies he had he had to do, which was to fulfill the city and the sanctuary are destroyed after 62 times 7, and that there was this covenant within 7 months period, or a period of sevens, and which in the middle of which the end of the sacrifice occurred, and that same time period there was a setup of an abomination of desolation. Okay, so some people would not know what I'm talking about when I say the number 7 is used here, and it could be meaning weeks, days, or months, or years. And so it's just simply, we don't realize it. It just says the number 7 in those certain situations, but it doesn't say what the period is. So here's how scholars point this out. Edward Hinson in the Popular Bible Commentary, Harvest House, 2007 and 246 says, quote, "The word week also means 7, Hebrew Shavua, and can mean 7 of anything, days, months, or years. The KJV translated 7 as weeks rather than 7, which actually they should have just said 7, and then they could have put in brackets question mark, or said if they wanted, they think it's weeks, they should have put in weeks then as their suggestion, but make clear it's not necessarily the correct translation or intended meaning of the passage. And I think it's actually, look what I have here. It has the meaning of simply 7 of anything, whether days, weeks, years, which is derived from context. So that's how you decide. You decide by looking at historical events and how they unfolded. And there was a deliberate what? Ambiguity. Not going to tell you, is it days, is it months, or is it years? And in this passage, as I'm showing you here, is 7 months is going to be the time period of the let's go back and look at that, the 7 period of months there. So some of it is months, some of it isn't. So this is deliberate by Daniel to just use the number 7, leaving it up to prophetic uh, acknowledgement when the events happen, and that's God's way of doing things. Brilliant stuff. Okay, so now here is the 2 verses that we're looking at, and then you'll see we have to interpret this to come up with whether there's a fulfillment of these items 3 and 4. So let's read them. And by the way, there's only 3 places. Well, there's only 2 places. I count this as one place that Messiah is used prophetically about Jesus. And that is in Psalm 2, where he calls him his son, this day begotten thee. And then he just says he'll rule over the people. This one is the other one. So this is important for Christians if you want to understand what Jesus's title of Christ actually means. So this is the NIV, verses 25, 26, and I'll just read it. Know and understand this. From the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, we saw that was 444 BC in his prior slide, until the Anointed One, the Messiah, Christos in Greek, or Christ in English, the ruler comes. There will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. So that's 69 sevens if you do the math. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. So we call that the 69 times 7 provision. Verse 26, after the 62 sevens, the Anointed One, the Messiah, would be put to death and will have nothing. So it's any time after 62 sevens. So the date of death doesn't have to be exact. Okay? And will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, not just the sanctuary. So that whole thing about the defilement of the sanctuary by Epiphanes, or whatever his name was, in 164 BC, that's irrelevant because the city didn't get destroyed and the temple didn't get destroyed either. It didn't get rebuilt. It just was fixed or whatever. It was sacrilege. That's all. But it had to be cleansed, and all kinds of cleansing had to be done. The end will come like a flood. Yes, indeed. If you study the history of the 1 million people who died inside of the Temple of Jerusalem, it was like a flood of blood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. That's the 62 times 7 provision. Okay, now it's always important to make sure you all know how definitive we can say 444 BC was the year the order went out to rebuild Jerusalem, because it's part of Jewish history. The Jewish Encyclopedia says this order went forth in 444 BC. Nehemiah, quote, arrived in Jerusalem in 444 BC with an appointment as governor of Judah, and his first action was to rebuild Jerusalem, including the temple. So that's when the order goes out. Okay, so now the next title of this panel slide is Messiah is cut off after 7 years after order to restore and rebuild. This is something we already did. I'm just giving you a review for you if you haven't seen it. When you convert 69 times 7 to the Babylonian lunar years, so obviously he's in Babylon, that's key to understand what the prophecy is about. That's where he's living at the time. Or it's 483 Babylonian lunar years, 360 days, okay? So 69 times 7 turns into 483, and that's 483 Babylonian lunar years of only 360 days, which converts into 476 solar years. So you take that's 365 days, and if you subtract 470 years, 6 years from 444 BC, you get 32 AD. Pretty neat, huh? And Wikipedia says Jesus' crucifixion took place most likely between 30 and 33 AD. So that's Jesus' crucifixion. So that's right on the money. Now, back we go to here. So we're going to get to pick this up from where that is, and we're going to look at 926. After the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be put to death and will have nothing. The people, the ruler who will come, will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. Now, Daniel 9:26 in the Israel Bible. I want you to see this. After those 62 weeks, i.e., the same 62 weeks for 428 solar years after the order to rebuild goes out, the anointed one will disappear and vanish. This is how they do it. The army of a leader, not the people of the ruler, as it is in the King James, and I think in here. See, it has the people of the ruler in NIV. That's not what it says. The Jewish people help us here. The army of a leader. And so this is, why are they doing this? The people of the ruler, they're they don't want you to know. I don't know why they don't want you to know this, what their bias is, but it's army of a leader when you look at the Greek, the Hebrew, who is to come, destroy the city and the sanctuary, but its end will come through a flood. Desolation is decreed until the end of war. And I would say it's a flood of blood, a flood of people crushed by the Romans, the way they brutally killed them. The Cambridge Bible Study for Schools and Colleges says the anointed one in 926 cannot be the same as the anointed one of Daniel 9:25, for he lived 62 weeks, 434 years after him. So just to show you, a lot of Christians don't read anything correctly, and this is not correct. And after those 62 weeks, not another 62 weeks, it's the same 62 weeks. So even the Jewish people read this correctly. How could a Cambridge Bible make such a blunder? I just don't understand. But anyway, this word "after" is crucial to not make the mistake the Cambridge Bible did. So they were trying to say these are two different messiahs. No, it's after 62 sevens. The anointed one we put to death. So anyway, they're incorrect. And then what's important here is now there's a prophecy in 27 that I'm trying to get to. He, the destroyer of sanctuary and city, will confirm a covenant with many for 1/7. Doesn't say what type it is. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering, and at the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end is decreed that is poured out on them. So now let's prove that Daniel 9:27 happened in the siege of Jerusalem. So it says he that destroyed the city and sanctuary, the city and the sanctuary have to be destroyed, and that happens in the seizure, the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD. But it says here he will confirm a covenant with many for 1/7. In the middle of 7, he will put an end to sacrifices and a daily meal offering, and he will set up an abomination. So listen, we'll confirm a covenant with many. Well, what's going on? If you just I typed into Google and I said, tell me what's the dates of the siege of Jerusalem. And they gave me, this is an automatic result, March, and they put it beautifully up on the screen, March 70 AD to September 70 AD. And I screen captured it. So if you count it on your fingers, it's 7. March, March, April, May, June, July. That's 5. Then my thumb is August, right? That's 6. And the next finger is September. 7, right? What luck could I have? But if you want to see where that is, it was reading through, and AI did an AI result from the article weaponsandwarfare.com 2015 12 22. I put it there because there's no possible way the scholars came up with the identical 7-month period I'm talking about being fulfilled in prophecy. They were just simply telling you the facts of history. They have no theological acts of any kind to grind at all. They're just telling you the events and how they happen and what sequence. So anyway, that's the answer to that, or at least that's my proposition. I'm going to show you what we have to. The real challenge is there any doubt about the ending of sacrifice? And you're going to see what you learn when you read the details of these articles. You'll see there was an end to the sacrifice, but not the way people think. Okay, now I do want to give you a little background. There's a covenant. It says there was a covenant with many. Okay, so now what fulfills that? Well, when you study again these books, and I'm citing that very article, and I say id here. Excuse me. Wait. Now the prophecy says this destroyer of the city will confirm a covenant with many. Okay, what does that mean? Well, look at the history. If you just read the history, it just flies off the face at you. They made a covenant with client ruler states. Listen to this. This is all coming out of an a YouTube called Siege of Jerusalem Part 1 documentary by Invicta, YouTube at 312 up to 349. So just that's where you'll see it if you want to see it visually. So it says there, we also know that 33% of the troops sieging Jerusalem came from the, quote, region's client rulers when the troops were first assembled near Alexandria, Egypt. See Siege of Jerusalem, Part 1, documentary by Invicta, YouTube at 312. The entire force was estimated as 60,000 men. Hence, about 20,000 came from the region's client rulers. The documentary states that it may be speculated that, quote, local rulers were eager to donate men to the war effort in a political bid to secure Rome's goodwill. Hence, this represents a covenant with many for that siege. That siege is 7 months, remember? And then I want you to listen to this. And he shall, upon the wing of abomination, shall come on one that makes desolate, and even unto the full end, and that determines shall wrath be poured out upon the desolate. Well, what does Ezekiel 47, 7-9 say? What will happen because foreigners, uncircumcised, come into his temple? Verse 7, in that you have brought in foreigners uncircumcised in heart and uncircumcised in flesh to be in my sanctuary, to profane it, even my house, when you offer my bread, the fat and the blood, and they have broken my covenant, to add unto all your abominations. Thus says the Lord Yahweh, no foreigner uncircumcised in heart and uncircumcised in flesh shall enter into my sanctuary of any foreigners that are among the children of Israel. So what did he say? Verse 7, foreigners uncircumcised in my sanctuary, to profane it, my house, and to add unto all your abominations. So this was just one more abomination. So that's what happened when the Roman officers and army finally break down the wall and pour in. They're inside the temple, and they're eventually inside the Holy of Holies area, and that's where they got a lot of emblems. They brought back the utensils, if you will, of the high priest are on the Ark of Triumph of Titus's triumphal arch. And that's proof positive of where they went and how far they went inside the temple. They actually had abominated the most holy of holies place of the temple. Okay, so that fulfills, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation. Now, I have a little more detail on that. Tacitus is an historian of Roman origin, Roman historian. And what happened when the soldiers were about to enter in 70 AD? He said a superhuman voice spoke and said that it was now leaving. Okay, so we have documentary proof, not from Christians, not from anybody but the pagans. And you'll see even the way he writes it, he doesn't know who it is. He's just recording what happened. This is what he says. This is in Tacitus Histories 3 4-5, and Annals 1-3. Loeb, Classical Library, Cambridge, Harvard University Press, 1931 at 193-9. Contending hosts were seen meeting in the skies, arms flashed, and suddenly the temple was illumined with fire from the clouds. Of a sudden, the doors of the shrine opened, and a superhuman voice cried, quote, "The gods are departing." At the same moment, the mighty stir of their going was heard. End of quote. Now, you might say, oh, well, this must have been written by a Jewish person or a Christian person. No, this is truly from Tacitus. And you also can kind of tell, even a Christian or a Jew would have probably put in the word God is departing, because we wouldn't attribute multiple gods to be departing. We would have just naturally said God is departing. So you can see this is authentic, real historical work by Tacitus of an event that was supernatural in nature, and they even knew it. And it's one of the most supernatural events witnessed by many people. And this is the only source, but I'm just saying this is a proof positive that what happened was the temple had been breached. God departs because of their entry. He didn't depart when it was before. He didn't depart until they violated that part of the temple. Now, what about the daily sacrifice? And that's in the prophecy, right? Well, there's if you look at this article here, turningpointsoftheancientworld.com, and this is I believe this is a verbatim quote. Yeah, I have quotation marks. By August, the victory Titus sought seemed to be just as elusive ever, but then came a dire omen. So August is 1 month before the actual siege succeeds in September. But in August, the victory for Titus seemed elusive. However, on what happens, this is when it broke. On the 5th of August, the last day, the daily sacrificial lambs ran out. Capitalizing on the despondency of the defenders, morale of Titus saw his chance. Then, less than a week later, the defenders launched an attack determined to repel the Romans. In retaliation, the Roman legionary hurled a torch into the midst of the Jewish ranks. The defenders scattered as the flame rose, raging out of control until the entire northern colonnade of the temple was engulfed. So that whole the cessation, if you will, of the ability to sacrifice any more lambs. They had no more sacrifices. They were upset. They were like, we have to win. We have to get this thing over with. And that actually prompted them to take these unusual risks, and the Romans took advantage of it. The siege that was going nowhere because they had lots of food in there, but now they don't have any sacrifice. That's really what upsets them, and they end up exposing themselves, and they all the Romans retaliate with fire, and that's really going to drive them out of there and end the siege. Now there's a little bit more. The Titus's men try to recover the temple items. Quote, even as the temple still burned, Titus ordered the holy treasures to be salvaged as his troops acclaimed him imperator. It was 665 years to the day since the Babylonians had destroyed the first temple. Now the second fell to the Romans, and Titus was to blame. So what were these holy treasures? Well, we have documentary proof that is unassailable. It's the Arch of Titus. So here are the objects of the high priest being taken out. So again, this reconfirms that there was an abomination that occurred inside the temple when these Roman officers, are obviously all uncircumcised, went into that Holy of Holies and took these things out. And as a result, the fulfillment of prophecy. The temple was an abomination. They set up an abomination at the temple in doing this. Okay, and here I want to turn to the Israel Bible because number one, it's the Christians have this some Christian theological translations try to make it appear that Jesus is leading the army to destroy the temple and the basically the sacrifice, and so he's putting an end to sacrifice. Can you believe this? The way they distort it to make our Lord Jesus, but he has to. They try to make it not clear that he also would be the same party who's bringing an abomination of desolation. So they're ascribing to Jesus a horrible crime on top of everything else, and that he was the one leading these armies. That's just unbelievable, just disgusting. But anyway, let's listen to the Jewish people to save us from this horrible nightmare of theological translations. And after those 62 weeks, the anointed one will disappear and vanish. Now, they have their own agenda, but he'll be cut off, and they want to translate it by disappear and vanish. Well, people are cut when people disappear and vanish. They are cut off, but people who are cut off can also disappear and vanish because they were killed. Okay, the army of a leader who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. So that has to be 70 AD. That prior, I told you already about that. But its end will come through a flood. Desolation is decreed until the end of war. So what? Why can I say the word flood applies here? Well, listen to this. It's actually in the book of Daniel. The word flood is used in a secondary, different sense, or in a different military sense. So let me show this to you. The end of the assault upon Jerusalem would come as a flood. The sense is figurative, as in Daniel 11, right? So this is 2 chapters later, where the same word describes a rapidly advancing army. That's in Daniel 11, verses 22, 26, and 40. So he is using it, or his prophetic vision is telling him it's like a flood. And that's a figurative term that is prophetic. Prophets can do that. And if you study the events there, as I showed you, once the sacrifices run out and they were cut off from having any more lambs. So the Romans had stopped the sacrifices. The people were outraged. We've got to undo the Roman, barring us of having any more animals by imprisoning us in a sense in our own city, Jerusalem, and our temple grounds. So they literally forced themselves to go out and be exposed. And then when they did that, the Romans suddenly, what was a standoff for months, they threw fire and all that stuff. So obviously, the people, were rushing to get out and away, and they apparently opened fissures that the Romans would just break through the walls, and just the whole thing collapsed suddenly in a matter of days. And that's how it all ended. It ended in a flood of a rapidly advancing army. And just to bulk up that proof there are many people who say that just the events, the way they unfolded, showed that a flood of Roman soldiers came in the breaches that had been developed after the people became hungry and starving and all that, and they fire inside and all that. So you can see more detail on this if you want to go to moorings.org and look for their article, Prophecy. Okay, and finally, we need to put the temple destruction on the timeline of 62 times 7. Okay, so what did we talk to you about that earlier? It's after 62 times 7 is the destruction of the temple. So let's do the conversion. When you convert 62 times 7 Babylonian lunar years, or 434 Babylonian lunar years at 360 days, which converts into 428 solar years, 365 days. And if you subtract 428 years from 444 BC, you get 16 BC. So the temple was destroyed 70 AD, which is after 62 times 7, which is 16 BC. That is, in other words, 86 total years after the time that Daniel said. So it had to be after 62 times 7, and it was exactly 86 years after. So that's a fulfillment. And he was not trying to give a precise date. Had to be after, and 86 years to me is pretty good. So to me, this is a fulfillment. It's after, and it's 86 years after. Okay, so we also have to prove that the city was destroyed in that same time period of sometime after 62 weeks by the same army that destroys the temple. So let's take a look at this. The army of a leader who, this is again Daniel 9:26, Israel Bible. The army of a leader who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Same time, same person. Titus. Titus destroyed the sanctuary. Titus is going to be the same person who's going to destroy the city. We'll take a look. Okay, and we have this quote from Titus, not Titus, Josephus' Wars 7.1.1. And he writes this, I think this is about 95 AD. The Romans then proceeded to raise the city. He writes this book in 95, I think, or 92 AD, about an event from 70 AD. The Romans then proceeded to raise the city. They tore down every building except 3 towers and the western wall, which Titus left as monuments to his victory. That's Josephus. So that means they left no trace of the temple complex. Oh, he actually adds there, no trace of the temple complex remained. So if you look at what Jesus said, and Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, see you not all of these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. That's the temple. Now, some people don't know this, but the Western Wall is not part of the temple proper. It is called the retaining wall of the hill known to Jews and Christians as the Temple Mount. So the Temple Mount is not the temple itself, it's the underlying physical mountain, if you will, to set that up. And then on top of that is the temple somewhere in the middle of it, but not the Temple Mount itself is just to create this mountain, this retainer walls, so that it won't slip down the hill. So that's not part of the temple itself, just so you know. So in sum, we've established all four of the predicates that show that Jesus Christ and the events of that time completely fulfilled Daniel 9:26 and 9:27, where the words Messiah appear twice, and he was cut off. The Messiah is cut off for his people, not for himself. I mean, he's done an atonement, and God Yahweh had said in the prior passage that he's going to do and make an atonement happen. So you have everything congealing together. There's no way you can say this was anything but the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD from Daniel 9:26-27. And I just have to say the Daniel 9:26 in the King James is misleading and is used for theological reasons deliberately. And I just want to say it needs to stop. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. This is King James here at the bottom. But not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the world. So by putting the end of the sanctuary, Jesus supposedly did away with the sacrifices system, and therefore he's our golden child for destroying the law and the prophets and all that. That's how people have distorted this, that Jesus brought an end to the sacrifices. And that's the prophecy here. No. And again, I want to say, look who's come to our aid, the Israel Bible, completely Jewish source, saying clearly without any of this prince stuff, the army of a leader who is to come, destroy the city and the sanctuary. That makes more sense, doesn't it? That Jesus doesn't come and destroy the city and the sanctuaries, even in a symbolic sense. But that's what some people say, and a lot of people say it. A lot of people say it. It's all over the internet. So, and in commentary by people you would think are sensible. Anyway, God bless everybody. Take care. Ciao. Bye.